Welcome to Arts Express. This is Prairie Miller, and on the show,
Moscow, Minsk, JFK Airport, the Epstein files scrubbed, and ISIS in the White House. Pacifica host Garland Nixon sorts it all out in the Thanksgiving Crime Scenes Edition episode this week.
Good evening. My name is Garland Nixon. So I am back. I was traveling, as a lot of people know. I put all my stuff online. I touched down in Istanbul. I went to Moscow. I went to St. Petersburg, and I went to Minsk, Belarus. And interesting stuff. So I got plenty to say here. We've got a Ukraine 28-point Ukraine resolution plan that the Trump administration has released. That's all the rage. Then you've got Venezuela. You've got all these ships threatening to attack Venezuela. And of course, you've got the Epstein files. And so we got plenty to talk about. The Epstein files, I'll say this, that in my opinion, they're scrubbed. They're scrubbed. They're scrubbed. They're scrubbed. They're going to release something. What, if you remember, what everybody asked for, they didn't ask for some Epstein files. They said, I want the list. We want a list of the names. Now, then the government people changed it to, oh, you want the Epstein files? We'll see about the, we didn't ask for the files. We said, who were the people who did it? We asked for the Epstein list. And then they convinced us, well, so you asked for the, no, we didn't ask for the files. We asked for the list. We're not even going to get the list, and we're not going to get the files. We're going to get some scrubbed documents that's going to have some, sacrificial lamb names in there and stuff like that. It is scrubbed, just like when you do a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request to the government and say, I want documents about this and that, and they send you something, and it's like 90% of it is blacked out, and they're like, well, due to national security issues, here's the document, and you're like, but all the words are blacked out. Well, we had to redact a little bit of it. Trust me when I tell you this, the Epstein stuff, whatever they're going to give us, it ain't going to be what we asked for, and it will be redacted. And the reason it will be redacted is because they cannot tie it to what it actually is. The Epstein was not a bad guy. He was not just a pedophile. Epstein was an intelligence operative working for the Mossad, the CIA, and MI6. He was involved in gun running. He was involved in weapons running. He was involved in money laundering. He was involved in everything. It was a hub of illicit intelligence activity. And one of the many things that the Epstein operation was involved in was called honeypot. And that was, they bring powerful people in, they get them to have sex with young women, boys, whatever the case they can get away with. They videotape it. So later on, when somebody says, I don't want to do something, they say, hey, would hate to see this videotape get out. That's what it was. So whatever we get, we'll pretend as though he was a bad guy, but it won't point to the reality that your government and other governments were involved in sex trafficking of minors. Yep, that's right. Face it, that's what it is. And when you discover, because see, there's something that goes along this. If people realize that their government was involved in sex trafficking with minors, it's kind of hard to put everything else past them. When somebody says, I think my government's doing this or that or evil thing, every week when I say your government's up to no good, oh, no, they're not. They're doing the right, people, no, I think they're telling us the truth about this particular issue. And I'm like, they ain't telling the truth about no particular issues. Once they're involved in sex trafficking, it's kind of hard to really come back to the point where you think they're telling you the truth about something, which isn't actually a fact. Venezuela, okay, they're threatening Venezuela, obviously. I wonder why. Do you think it could be because of all that oil? No. If you are a stooge, if you're a schlep, if you're, God knows, for just some person who wants to really believe, then you ignore the fact that Venezuela has more oil than any country in the world. And you're like, no, I really do think that the United States government is concerned about the democracy of the Venezuelan people, and Maduro's a dictator, and they're standing up against dictators because our government is really concerned about justice and goodness and democracy and the Venezuelan people. If you're a complete idiot, you believe that. If you're a simp, you believe that. You're like, no, it's not. I don't think, yeah, it's not another war for oil. Granted, we've overthrown a lot of countries specifically to steal their natural resources, but not this time, buddy. This time, it is for justice, democracy, and goodness. That's why we want to overthrow the government of Venezuela and secure their oil fields. I'll be honest. I have difficulty sometimes even grasping that there are still people in this country who think the United States government is not planning on stealing the oil from Venezuela. In fact, let me go one better. Before Trump left, the last time he said, yeah, Venezuela's right there and they got out of oil. We could have took the oil. What do you think? You think that no, they changed their mind? Well, it was all about oil before, but this time we've changed their mind. It's about democracy. I find it difficult to believe that there are people still that believe that crap. And then when I realize it, I understand why America is coming to pieces. I understand why America is falling apart. Because if the people will believe these level of absurdities, the government can do anything. If your government overthrows country after country, steals their stuff, commits genocide, literally, look, how about all these years? If you've been listening to this show, what have I been saying? ISIS is a United States government operation. It's funded by ISIS. No, it's not, Garland. The government's here to fight ISIS. And I was like, I even went over this. Tulsi Gabbard, in I forgot what year it was, 2016, 17, she put out a bill, and it was called the Stop Arming Terrorists Act. I talked about it on one of these shows. And in that, she said, we're arming ISIS in Syria and we need to stop doing it. In fact, she got in an argument in a debate with Kamala Harris where she said, we're arming terrorists, we're arming ISIS in Syria. And Kamala Harris says, you're what'd you call her? You're an Assad toady. You're an Assad puppet. You love Assad. And she says, well, we're arming ISIS. Now, a guy named, his last name is Al-Jilani. The United States had a $10 million bounty on his head because he was an ISIS leader. And now he's the head of Syria, installed by the U.S. and Turkey and Israel. And he was in the White House the other week. They dropped the $10 million bounty for his head, and now he's in charge. So, do you recall me saying that the United States was funding ISIS and that they were nothing but an operation of the U.S.? And they said we were in Syria fighting ISIS. And now the head of ISIS in Syria has been put in charge of Syria. And he was in the White House shaking hands, or he was in the White House? He was in the UN shaking hands with the president of the United States. Did you hear the Democrats gripe? Did you hear the Democrats stand up? Oh, my God, Trump, that's unacceptable. No, they didn't. No, they didn't, because they're part of the team. They're on board with the team. Go ISIS. But when I say these things, I get callers, Garland, you're standing up for Assad. You're, whoever it is that at the time we're supposed to hate. At the time it was supposed to be Assad. He was supposed to be the bad guy. So people would call Garland, you're standing with Assad. Now, of course, when Saddam was the bad guy, hey, Garland, how dare you? What do you love Assad? And of course, Putin's the bad guy. Oh, my God, you love Putin. People are brainwashed. That's why our country's going straight to crap. Our country is in dire, dire economic straits. And you know the really bad thing about it? They can't even tell you how bad it is. You know why? Because if the United States government told you just how bad the dire economic straits are of the country, consumer confidence would collapse, and the government's economic situation would collapse sooner than it is already going to collapse. It'd collapse now. If they told us, well, the truth is we're paying $1 trillion a year just to service the debt, just to service the interest on our debt, and within a couple of years we're going to be paying $2 trillion. And guess what? In no time flat, we will not have one dime for spending. We won't have nothing. It'll all be going to our debt. And by the way, the debt's increasing. So if they told you that, people would go, oh my God. And then the economy would collapse now instead of later. But meanwhile, all they got to say is there's Putin, there's Maduro, there's Xi in China, there's North Korea. All they got to do is tell you that there's a threat, and that threat is 10,000 miles away on the other side of the world. And rather than look at Capitol Hill, rather than look at Wall Street by the people that are taking us straight to hell, you'll be like, well, Garland, don't you know that we should stand up against Putin and North Korea and Assad and whatever other person that they give you to hate. It's just sad and pathetic to me, but that's where we are. Let me talk a little bit about my trip. As people know, a few years ago, when I started hearing all this business about Venezuela's evil, Venezuela's this, Venezuela that, I set myself up for a trip to Venezuela, and I went to Venezuela. And I traveled all over Venezuela. Not all over, but I traveled around Venezuela. I went to the mountains. I went to different places. I talked to people in the villages. I did this and that in Venezuela. I had to find out. I met with the opposition in Venezuela. I had the ability to do that, and I did it. And I met with opposition parties. I can tell you about the opposition parties. I can tell you about the parties that opposed Maduro from the left and from the right. Why? Because I went there and I found it out myself. Fortunately, I had the capabilities to go to Russia and to go to Belarus, and none of it was paid by anybody in Russia. None of it was paid by anybody. This was all covered, this was on my dime, okay? So I wasn't paid for by the government of Russia. No. Now I do. A lot of people don't know this. I do a lot of international politics. I go on Wyon in India. That's their Wyon is a very interesting channel. TRT in Turkey. I go in on a number of channels in Russia, a bunch of them in Belarus, a lot of them, some in France, different places around the world. So when I go over there, oddly enough, nobody knows who the heck I am here, but I'm kind of well known in that part of the world, oddly, interestingly enough. So I went to Moscow. And I went to St. Petersburg, and I went to Minsk, which is a city in Belarus. Tell you about Minsk. Here's what's interesting. People are so brainwashed. I came back and I had people say, oh my gosh, I'm glad you made it back from Moscow safely. I'm like, Moscow safely? It's the safest city I went in the world. I said, ironically, when I came back, my luggage didn't arrive with me because the planes changed too fast. Right now, here's the ironic. After people telling me, "Oh, Garland, did you get back safe?" I'm like, the safest city I've ever been to. I was scared to go to East Baltimore. I'll get stuck up there. But Moscow is about as safe as can be. Very little crime. Minsk, zero crime. I said, but when I came back, so the airline said, "Hey, Garland, I'm saying they contacted me. Your luggage wasn't there, but it'll be overnighted to you." Well, it had to be FedExed. And since it had to be FedExed, somebody had to open the luggage and go through it. It was obvious somebody went through it because, if you fill out the FedEx paper, it has to say, and I understand that, it has to say there's no dangerous stuff or substances in here. So, of course, they had to look so they could fill out the paper that. Well, so obviously, when somebody was looking, they found an envelope I had with $500 and stole it. So I went to Moscow, St. Petersburg, Minsk, Istanbul, not a bit of crime. I get back to the U.S., somebody robs me, sticks me for 500 beans. Took it, there's a black envelope sitting right there. I open it up, there's nothing in it. And everything's ruffled up. I'm like, doggone it. Well, my bad. I never stopped. I know you shouldn't put money in your luggage, but I did, and somebody stole it at JFK. But that's the thing. Did you make it back safely? Well, kind of, but somebody hit me up for 500 beans when I got back to the United States.
And coming up next on Arts Express.
They see how prepared we are. No, it starts a nuclear war.
Approximately 3 minutes ago, we detected an ICBM over the Pacific. Current flight trajectory is consistent with impact somewhere in the continental United States.
Is this real? We are talking about hitting a bullet with a bullet.
If we do not take steps to neutralize our enemies now, we will lose our window to do so.
If we get this wrong, none of us are going to be alive tomorrow.
There is no plan B. None of this makes sense. Making all these bombs and all these plans. The walls are just ready to blow.
And those were scenes from the imminent nuclear war doomsday thriller Catherine Bigelow's A House of Dynamite, in which Jared Harris stars as the tragic figure of the U.S. Secretary of State. And Harris is our guest on the show, talking about the simultaneously released Reawakening, a kind of happily ever after family crisis drama, but with a twist, in which a teen runaway returns years later and Harris's grieving father's turmoil as to is she or isn't she his daughter. The actor likewise sheds light on the many dark themes in his movies, including portraying Valery Legasov in Chernobyl, the Soviet chemist leading the investigation into the nuclear disaster, who later committed suicide, and Harris's upcoming Reykjavik, the historic meeting between Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan back then that stopped a brewing nuclear war. Plus, Harris as his John Lennon, Andy Warhol, King George, Henry VIII, and others on screen. First, some scenes from Reawakening, then Jared Harris.
Would I know her now, if I got a glimpse? Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Would I know her? Would I?
Claire Reed was 14 when she left home. Today, the 10-year anniversary, we are making a new appeal.
Claire, we love you. We miss you. Please come home.
Did you grow up around here? You look about the same age as my daughter.
Hey? Do you think she's still alive?
What kind of father would I be if I didn't keep looking?
What kind of father were you?
Claire.
She's come back to us. So many questions.
What do you want?
Only to explain. We mustn't press her. We must not push her.
What do we do for your 9th birthday?
John! I don't remember.
Don't remember? 10 years, Mary. 10 years.
Dad, help me.
I couldn't.
Claire's name came up as a possible match.
Have you ever seen her before? You know her?
You've been watching me. Maybe we should talk.
You thoughtless little girl!
What have we got that she could possibly want?
Please forgive me.
10 years. 10 years. 10 years.
She's come back, John. Whether you like it or not.
Hello.
Hi, it's Jared Harris. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Now, why was Reawakening and the story a film you wanted to be part of?
Well, the script was just so good, and that really is always the starting point for me. It was just a page turner. It was a really gripping read. It was so layered in terms of what it was about. I mean, superficially, there's a sort of thriller element to it. Is this person the person who she says she is, or is she sort of pulling one over on the parents? And then, more interestingly, it was sort of started to become an examination of the couple and the way that they had dealt with what had happened 10 years earlier. And in fact, sort of the way that they hadn't really addressed it. They'd sort of dealt with it individually, but they hadn't really addressed it with each other. And they'd sort of just accepted that people have their own unique way of grieving, if you like. But and then there was the irony, if you like, in the fact that the father never stopped looking for the daughter, but he is the one who can't accept that she has returned. And the mother kind of resolved it within herself, and then finds this an easier situation to accept, or superficially. It was really sort of brilliantly done, brilliantly constructed script.
And what do you feel Reawakening presents in a greater sense, and including your character John, repeatedly drawn to the community center for homeless teens, a reflection on the reality and plight of alienated youth in the troubled world they face today all around them?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, because of what's happened, he finds his way drawn into that world, and starts to sort of appreciate how many people are sort of pulled into that, if you like. And he forms lasting friendships with those people, and it becomes a sort of quiet supporter of the efforts of the people to try and help the runaways, people who are sort of end up on the streets through no fault of their own. Yeah.
And what is your interpretation of the film's title, Reawakening?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, that was a question that did come up, and it was a different each character in a way has their own answer to that question. I think for John, he sort of buried himself to the present tense, if you like. His life goes on hold 10 years ago, and until he can find this answer to this question, he can't really move forward. So in a way, the reawakening is almost a sort of living in the present tense and accepting this new opportunity that's come along. I mean, they're quite remarkable as a couple, these two, John and Mary, because normally when something like this happens, historically you find that it rips the marriage apart. And quite often don't survive something like this. So there's a very strong bond there, but a lot of that bond has been done in silence, if you like.
And I wanted to ask you, what drew you into portraying Gorbachev in your upcoming film,
Reykjavik.
Described as the most dangerous point of the Cold War, when Reagan and Gorbachev met in Iceland over one tense weekend to decide if there will be peace or war in the world.
Yeah, it's a true story, and again, in that particular case, the writer had managed to get hold of the transcripts. So a lot of what we were saying to each other in the performance was actually conversations that they had with each other. Again, really well written script, and something that I remember very clearly happening, and a lot of the hopes that we had for the staving off the fears we had of a nuclear war erupting between the United States and the Soviet Union, well, kind of got pinned on the new Soviet leader. That there was this guy who'd come along who seemed to have wanted to have a different relationship with the West, and up to that point, Reagan had been saber rattling, and it was quite alarming. But it turned out that he was a very smart man and a very effective politician, and when a deal comes on the table, he's attracted to the idea of it. And again, actually, remarkably, what changed Reagan's mind was that ABC movie special the day after. He watched that movie, and that changed his mind about the idea that one could win a nuclear exchange, a nuclear war. And in Gorbachev's mind, it was the disaster at Chernobyl that made him realize that there's just no way that anyone could survive, if you like, a nuclear war in any way that was meaningful. And both of these events is what drew these two leaders to the table to discuss nuclear disarmament for the first time.
And speaking of which, what are your thoughts about being part of the production Chernobyl and your tragic figure as the U.S. Secretary of Defense in your other current doomsday drama, The House of Dynamite? And all these years later, when Europe over there is still mired in conflict and an endless war.
Well, I mean, as it relates to Chernobyl itself, the site itself, it's obviously alarming that because it's a site that's contaminated, and it will be for the next, I think, what is it? It's like next 25,000 years. I mean, the containment site that they've put on it, I think, is supposed to be, reliable for the next 100 years or so, but then it would need to be reinforced and redone. So the idea that there's explosions happening around it, or it's being used as a pawn, is pretty horrific.
And what can you say about the creative influence on you of your iconic father, Richard Harris, and his work, and growing up with him?
Well, we were able to discuss. We at the dinner table, we would sit and chat about great performances, often in the theatre, and I learned a lot from listening to him talk about, let's say, the 5 best Hamlets that he ever saw, and why each one was different, and what their interpretation was based upon, and how the challenge that you have in playing a role that has been played before is through your specific thoughts and feelings and your interpretation of the role, and you're not just simply learning the words and standing on a spot in space and opening your mouth and letting the words come out in the correct order. It's obviously much, much, much more significant than that, and that how you view the world and how you view yourself as a human being in that world, it influences the choices that you make, and that's what's so unique about your performance and your interpretation.
And what are the different challenges for you of portraying real people, John Lennon, Andy Warhol, Ulysses S. Grant, King George VI, Henry VIII, and Valery Legasov in Chernobyl?
Yeah, I mean, what's the challenge of it?
Yeah,
it depends
of
how well
portraying
known
real
they are.
people instead of like fictional characters.
Yeah, I mean, there's another one in there, Al Alvarez, who I played in Sylvia, and of course he's not well known, and he's actually the only real person that I played that I actually met in person.
Oh.
He was still alive. It depends how well known they are. If you're playing somebody like John Lennon, everyone has a very specific idea already about who their version of John Lennon is. And when that came out, the two of us came out, I got quite a lot of flack because I wasn't playing the John Lennon that has been mythologized, which is this sort of peace on earth and Imagine and all that. So that this very spiritual, very inclusive character who dressed all in white and was sort of vaguely Christ-like. That's not at all who this person was at that point in his life. He was angry and he was bitter. He had a lot of unresolved conflicts within him. He could be extremely sarcastic, very cutting and very biting, very funny, verbally extremely dexterous. And so it depends what people's impressions of it are. I mean, again, when I played Ulysses S. Grant, the thing that I was immediately aware of was just how I had swallowed the spoon-fed history of the man. That it still exists to this day, and that he's largely dismissed as a sort of incompetent president. And as a commander, a military commander, he was a butcher who was prepared to slaughter more of his soldiers to achieve an aim than the other side was willing to do. And he had no particular gift for it. None of it true. His campaigns are taught in military academies around the world, and his Vicksburg campaign is considered on par with Napoleon's campaign against the Austrian Empire. And then a whole load of other stuff that you realize. He passed the first Civil Rights Act that became the basis for the Civil Rights Act that was passed in the 60s. He sort of foresees the need for a deliberative body for nations to resolve conflicts that becomes the basis for the League of Nations and then the United Nations. And he did a lot. And it was a success story as well, if you think about it. He was selling firewood by the side of the road when the war breaks out, and 8 years later, he's the president of the country. But history was rewritten immediately after the war ends by J.G. Pollard. He writes a book called The Lost Cause Narrative, and that reframes the entire context for the war. And that's where largely the confusion still exists today, and that it was about something other than slavery, which is, of course, not the case. It was about slavery.
And what was it like meeting Alvari, a poet, critic, and mentor of Sylvia Plath, before you portrayed him?
He was. I mean, the immediate thing he said to me is, he looked at me. He said, "Well, I wish I was as tall as you." He was quite a short man, and he looked like he was in one of those sort of white Aran Island sweaters, and he looked like he'd just come off the sea. You know, with a beard and red hair, and he was very chatty. And he told me a lot about his relationship with Sylvia, and about her relationship with Ted. But and of course, you know, I at some points you getting back to your question, when you're playing somebody who people are aware of, if you're say playing Marilyn Monroe or Elvis Presley or something like that, or Marlon Brando, you're aware of the fact that people are aware of what they look like and how they appeared. So you do have to put in a fair bit of work to achieve enough of that people can see that character there. But you don't want to disappear into prosthetics, because once you disappear into all that stuff, the audience also knows who you are, and then they play a game of, can they see the actor behind all the prosthetics or not? And that becomes distracting. So it's a nod towards you can pass as that character and still play the role, because essentially it's still a fictionalized version of it. You know, the writer has made a decision about what aspects of that character they need to use to tell the story. You know, that was one of the things I learned when playing Warhol, was after I did the research, I went off and did the research for a month or so, and maybe 10% of what I found was in the script, you know.
And what led you into directing as a venture, and with Mad Men as your directing choice?
Well, people were doing it, you know. John Hamm directed an episode, I think 2. Slattery directed several, and I fancied the idea. And then Matt was sort of with regret had written me off the show, and he wanted to find some way. He was open to the idea of finding some way for me to stay involved. And I said, well, what about me directing an episode? Which he thought about, and he thought about it for a long time, and then eventually said, okay, you'll have to come in, you'll have to learn, you have to shadow someone who's directing so you can learn, you know, what it entails, etc. But honestly, by the time I came in, that show was pretty much directed itself. I'm not going to tell John Hamm anything about Don Draper that he doesn't already know, so I wouldn't insult him by trying to give him an insight into Don Draper, and similarly with Elizabeth or any of the other characters. And chiefly your job on that is, you know, come in with a plan of how to shoot the scene, but there were very strict rules about what you could and couldn't do. And, you know, Chris Manley would tell me, that's a great shot, but I'm not going to do it because it'll take me 40 minutes to set it up and Matt will never use it. So everyone knew the show at that point. My job was to help the people who were just coming on for that episode, who would be a little bit of deers and headlights going, oh my God, I'm on Mad Men and I'm in a scene with John Hamm, you know, and just help them out. And remind the actors what the story was, because there was this sort of crazy thing about secrecy where they wouldn't give the actors the script until the day before the episode started. So you don't have time to absorb the information and start to let it live in your subconscious and your imagination, so that you can understand what this particular episode is trying to get at, rather than just superficially the events, you know. So then you would help to remind them that because you're shooting out a sequence, this scene's connected to the scene that happens in the, you know, earlier on in the story. We haven't shot it yet, but this is what it's playing on, you know. So you could tell them stuff like that.
Now, without giving anything away, what would you hope Reawakening conveys to audiences?
It's proper, good, classic storytelling, and it speaks to a theme about, is it better to know the truth or to live with an illusion? And if you would be happier with the illusion, is the truth worth pursuing, if you like? Because that's the sort of the difference between the two of them. And John has that very male thing of wanting to know the facts and wanting to know the details, and I have to know the truth. And Mary feels that the truth is what feels right to her. That's what makes sense to her.
One final question. Since this is for radio and the listeners can't see you, when Jared Harris looks in the mirror, what does he see?
I mean, shock, mostly. Just, beating wings of time flapping behind my head.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jared Harris, for joining us on the show, and I will get the word out about Reawakening.
Bless you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to tell you, it just means so much when people like yourself come up to support what essentially is an independent film.
Yeah.
And with the challenge of trying, the interesting thing is it isn't impossible for people to make a movie now. The impossible thing is to let people know that you've made this movie and to try and get their attention as to why to watch it. Because you're not just competing with other films that are coming out at the same time, but there's just such a sort of a myriad of entertainment choices, and just competing on that level is so difficult. So I really appreciate your support. Thank you very much. Bless you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
And coming up next on the show.
T-minus 30 seconds and counting.
28.
ECS reduced for launch. Roger.
25.
Status check. Go Atlas. Go Centaur.
We have main engine start.
Stand by for mode 1 Bravo.
15 seconds and counting. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
He's looking good.
Greetings to those of you watching in the distant future. Whoever you are, wherever you are, and however this film is reaching you. I don't know what kinds of news media you currently rely on, but I'm writing from a time in history when we're about to lose a source of news you've probably never even heard of. Something we call a newspaper. A neatly organized and highly edited collection of articles, essays, stories, opinions, photographs, and information, printed daily on a thin yet surprisingly strong paper called newsprint. The newspaper was divided into topical sections of various lengths, folded in half to make it easier to handle, and was purchased at small kiosks called newsstands, or from small-scale entrepreneurs on the street. It was something most people read in the morning, with their coffee, over breakfast, on the ride to work. With a shelf life of less than 24 hours, the newspaper was disposable. When you were done reading it, you threw it away. A symbolic recycling in anticipation of tomorrow's edition. I write these words at a time when the printed newspaper, as I've come to know and love it, is on the verge of extinction.
And those were scenes from Letter to the Editor, director Alan Berliner's Back to the Future love letter to the death of newspapers today, photos compiled over decades, and the extraordinary filmmaker and artist who collaborated with him, and the subject of Benita, his new film about Benita Raphan, who took her own life, and why.
On a January afternoon in the middle of the COVID pandemic, I received the devastating news that my fellow filmmaker Benita Raphan had taken her life by suicide. I was the creative advisor on several of Benita's films, and while I may have known the highs and lows of her film career, I now realize I had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. It's only now I understand that almost everything we worked on contained hints of Benita's struggles. And I just didn't see it.
So much like Benita, to want to understand people who are sadly tormented so that they can create. People who struggle with mental illness.
The thing that I do that's the strongest is I'm able to put associations together with images and words and kind of make a mix of things.
It's a style of filmmaking I had never seen before, and I wanted to learn something from it.
She taught me a lot. You can juxtapose the sound and be very effective against a totally weird picture.
I spent a year going through Benita's personal archive, looking for anything that could help me tell her story. Think of this film as an experiment in collaboration. Benita left behind thousands of pieces. My job was to splice them together, to do whatever it takes to bring Benita's creative spirit to life.
We'll be speaking with Berliner at a later date, and there is information about his screenings and upcoming award at the Hamptons Film Festival that can be found at alanberliner.com.
And now on Arts Express.
This is Bro on the Global Television Beat, Breaking Glass. Today's episode, Robin Hoods, a corporate versus an anti-colonial Sherwood Forest.
We'll teach those who tread on us. Nothing will keep them safe from vengeance.
These woods are as old as the earth. No man will ever own them. You've got talent, my boy. Do it again.
We conquered your lands. Now we rule. No one will ever know you or your kind existed.
They rob us of our coin and call it the law. They kill our people and call it justice. And yet they call us thieves. Then let us be thieves with a purpose.
The Robin Hood myth, legend, and factual account continues to exert a powerful pull over, especially in these days, our own land, where robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, or even taxing the rich and taking a meager portion of their income, is a major battle. Into this fray comes a contemporary television series titled simply Robin Hood, produced and streaming on MGM+, the studio recently bought by Amazon. This Robin, full of raucous, savage violence and gratuitous sex, a kind of 300 Robin Hood, dispenses with wealth distribution and instead focuses on a quarrel among elites. Norman lords versus Saxon lords, with the young Robin's father the latter. The peasantry are almost nowhere to be found, and when they do show up in a wedding ceremony, they bop around, not like weary toilers of the soil, but like hobbits. Sean Bean is along as the well-meaning sheriff forced to issue a harsh decree. This conservative revisionist characterization goes along nicely with the postmodern claim that there is no evil or exploitation, only murky, unknowable motives. The situation figured here, unfortunately, has elements of accuracy because what we get in most British and American mainstream media is indeed a debate between one group of the wealthy and another. That is in Britain, Labour and Conservatives, and in the US, Republicans and Democrats, with the actual will of the people almost nowhere in evidence. We had Errol Flynn's swashbuckling Robin Hood in the 30s, the television series The Adventures of Robin Hood in the 50s, the majority of the episodes written by Hollywood blacklistees. And now we have Jeff Bezos' Robin Hood, where two CEOs hammer it out while the rest of us serfs are left to till our digital fields on the AI manner. But all is not lost in the legend. The television series The Adventures of Robin Hood, all 143 episodes from 1955 to 59, available for free on YouTube and Dailymotion, was the first hit of the fledgling and more popular ITV network, challenging the BBC's stodgy elitism, and featuring scripts written by groups of casualties of the McCarthy era in New York, Los Angeles, and on the continent, including Hollywood 10 members Ring Lardner and Adrian Scott. Robin Hood and his merry band of guerrilla warriors. This Robin Hood comes of age in the wake of both the 1955 Bandung Conference of non-aligned nations seeking their own sovereignty and independence, which took place in the year the series originated, and the guerrilla wars that both preceded and followed the conference, as country after country revolted and won their freedom from the colonial European powers. The raping of the land and theft of its resources during the colonial period, which after World War II everywhere was attempted to be revived, was particularly dominant in India, which won its independence in 1947. Just as in the series, the Norman lords were exploiting the Saxon peasants, with Robin defining himself as a Saxon outlaw, so too the British decimated India in the 19th and 20th centuries. Real wages declined, prompting famines, with this exploitation resulting in 50 million excess deaths in one 30-year period. Britain destroyed a once vibrant Indian economy and through a system of exorbitant taxes forced the Indians to export food and cotton to the empire, even in times of famine, in a system of legal plunder and a drain on the country's wealth. Likewise, the complaint of many of those in and around Sherwood Forest in multiple episodes is the high taxes the serfs are forced to pay to support the lifestyle of the Norman lords, while they are barely able to feed their families. Similar practices were at work in Indonesia by the Dutch colonizers, where the Dutch East India Company moved to colonize vast expanses of Java to produce the new, most desired commodities, coffee, tea, tobacco, and sugar for the European aristocracy and bourgeoisie. Every peasant now had to pay 1/4 of their harvest in tax and were charged an ever-increasing price to lease what were once their own lands. When the Dutch tried to recolonize from the Japanese after World War II, the Indonesians waged a fierce 4-year guerrilla war where the objective was to harass the enemy. In this war, the Dutch held the main roads and the Indonesian Republicans swarmed into the mountains and held the hinterlands. One of the main antitheses in the series is the contrast in locations between the sheriff and the lords in their castles and the commoners and outlaws in either their primitive shacks or in the forest. The Indonesians were adept at picking off convoys which ventured into the countryside, as Robin's men often robbed their representatives of the landed gentry who dared to enter the forest. The principle of guerrilla warfare, as stated by one of the Indonesian leaders, is based on the people. If the people support you, you will always win. As Robin states in the episode A Guest for the Gallows, we're never alone as long as we have friends among the people. In 1955, with independence secured and the year the series debuted, the Indonesian President Sukarno convened the Bandung Conference in Java, attended by prominent African, Asian, and African American advocates for overthrowing the system of colonialism. Bandung was described by the African American writer Richard Wright as a meeting of the rejected, the despised, the insulted, the hurt, the dispossessed, and by a French observer as événement universel planétaire, a universal planetary event comparable to the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and the independence of the United States, and by another commentator as the first intercontinental conference of colored peoples in the history of mankind. Hated and opposed by the American and European rulers, such as U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, who characterized its principles of sovereignty and neutrality as immoral, and the French officials annoyed that representatives of its colonies in Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria had been invited. Nevertheless, the spirit of Bandung spread precisely in the years that on British and U.S. television, Robin and his merry men battled the Norman colonizers in Sherwood, with the series being a hit in London, in the working-class Midlands, and in the U.S. In this period, many of the British, French, and Belgian colonies won their independence, often by waging guerrilla wars. Season 1, Episode 12, A Guest for the Gallows, begins as does the other episodes in Season 1 and 2, with a minstrel song that in Brechtian fashion summarizes the episode, a kind of leftist log line. The episode proper then commences with the sheriff's tax collectors arriving in his quarters with 2 boxes loaded with tribute, while naming the one yeoman behind on his taxes. The sheriff orders him thrown in the castle tower to be hanged for his negligence. A sympathizer steals off in the night to warn the outlaws. This is one of many noir touches. Robin's first appearance in the series is him cloaked in darkness as he scales the walls to enter his own castle. The darkness in these sequences not only alerts the viewer to the fact that these are dark times, but also allows the producers to save money by concealing sets. This technique was used to perfection in American B-noirs such as the 1947 Anthony Mann French Revolution period noir, The Black Book. To save the yeoman, Robin disguises himself as a meat merchant who, when asked by a suspicious sheriff where his stock comes from, replies in a materialist manner, "The beef from cattle, the mutton from sheep." Robin plays on the greed of the sheriff in offering him 100 cattle if he will come with him into the forest. Robin then arranges a trade, the sheriff for the man about to be hanged, but the sheriff's men betray the arrangement and attempt to ambush Robin. Friar Tuck and his monks get in the way of the ambush, fulfilling Robin's dictum about having the backing of the people. Out of the forest appears Little John and a guerrilla band that forces the sheriff and his men to back off. As to his underlings' treachery, the sheriff says, "A word given to an outlaw means nothing," emphasizing that the colonial Normans can never be trusted to hold up their end of a bargain, as, for example, the 1945 Indonesian Statement of Independence was betrayed by the Dutch. The battle at the end with Robin's men stresses the technological superiority of the Lord's henchmen, who use a deadly manufactured crossbow, which just has to be aimed, whereas Robin's men use longbows fashioned from the forest trees, which require dexterity rather than just crude power, as the colonizers frequently waged war with the most advanced weapons. The Adventures of Robin Hood expresses not only the domestic concerns of black listees, but also a larger, more multinational concern with the anti-colonial struggles for independence concomitant with this iteration of the legend. Meanwhile, the parallels to current colonial struggles against a rapacious and increasingly more dangerous U.S. empire in Gaza, Venezuela, and the 3 African countries of the Sahel, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, attempting to reclaim economic sovereignty, could not be more direct. This is Bro on the Global Cultural Beat, Breaking Glass.
And that's all we have time for today on Arts Express, Expression in the Arts. And if you'd like to express yourself too, you can write to us at theradiogoddess@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Prairie Miller leaving the station.